Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America and around the globe. I'm Nkem Ifejika. Our top stories. President Trump has blocked the release of a document which rebuts claims of anti-Trump bias in the FBI's Russia probe. US officials consider what action to take after 2 British jihadis are captured in Syria. Families of the victims say the fighters should face trial. Uber agrees to pay Waymo $245 million in shares to settle allegations that it stole trade secrets. Funding cuts threaten to take the shine off the world's biggest street party as 1.5 million tourists head to Rio for the annual carnival. In the past few hours, President Trump has blocked the release of a classified memo which rebutted claims that there was anti-Trump bias in the FBI's investigation of Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election that brought President Trump to power. The White House said the memo, written by the Democratic congressman, couldn't be released because it contained classified material. Our correspondent, Peter Bowes, has more on the plan to redact the memo in order to get it published.
Well, the Democrats are saying that they will consider some redactions, and actually that isn't a huge surprise. I think we had been half expecting that this would happen. Certainly over the last few days, the signs were that the White House would probably come back and say that out of security considerations it wasn't able to release this document, which, as you have already said, is essentially a redaction, is essentially a rebuttal of the very controversial document that we saw last week from the Republicans that essentially accused the FBI of being biased against Donald Trump.
And if these redactions can be got through, do you think the president will agree to release the memo?
Well, that's certainly the suggestion from the statement that we've had from the White House, that the President has instructed the Justice Department to work with the committee in the House looking at security matters that's responsible for this memo to see if there is a way to release it without jeopardizing any issues of security. That would suggest that the White House and President Trump is open to its eventual release.
The White House has confirmed that a second staff member has resigned over allegations of domestic abuse. The speechwriter David Sorensen denied claims by his former wife that he was violent and abusive, but said he was stepping down because he didn't want to be a distraction for the Trump administration. His resignation comes 2 days after the White House aide Rob Porter quit over claims of abuse by 2 former wives, which he denies. The scandal has put the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly under pressure with questions over how much he knew about the allegations. Now, US officials say they're considering what action to take after 2 British jihadis were captured in Syria. Alexander Koti and El-Shafi El-Sheikh were part of a team of 4 British IS members who the Americans say killed 27 hostages. Families of the victims have called for them to stand trial. Daniel Sanford reports.
They became the most infamous gang of foreign fighters in the self-styled Islamic State. Callous torturers and public executioners of hostages. Jihadi John, his real Mohammed Emwazi, now dead. Ain Davis, in prison in Turkey. And the 2 men we now know were captured last month, Alexander Koti and El-Shafi El-Sheikh. The gang are suspected of beheading Alan Henning, a driver and aid worker from Eccles, and David Haynes, a long-time aid worker from Perth, his daughter now contemplating what punishment his newly captured suspected killers should face.
They should die a long, slow, painful death. And I think quite a lot of people will understand that they shouldn't be allowed to live. But realistically, that's not going to happen. And you have to come to terms with that. And then the best thing for them is to be locked up and throw away the key. They should never be allowed back in society because they will just recruit people and they will just do this again.
And for the sake of her father, if they end up in court, she will go to watch.
If it goes to trial, I'll certainly be there, certainly want to look them in the eye and let them know that I'm who I am and they have destroyed a big part of my life, and hopefully there will be some sort of justice.
Some of the gang's hostages were freed, including former French reporter Nicolas Hénin. He wants them to have the fairest trial possible.
I would not be happy if they were just sent to Guantanamo Bay, because this is denial of justice.
El-Shafi el-Sheikh arrived in Syria from Britain in 2012. Alexander Coty left the UK on an aid convoy to Gaza in 2009 and also ended up in Syria. Their gang is accused by the US of beheading at least 27 hostages, including Alan Henning, David Haynes, and Americans James Foley, Peter Kassig, and Stephen Sotloff. They're also suspected of waterboarding, mock executions, crucifixions, and electric shock torture.
Alexander Coty and El-Shafi el-Sheikh grew up close to each other in quite a small area of West London near to the A40 flyover. It became infamous as an IS recruiting ground. As well as Mohammed Emwazi, Jihadi John, some half a dozen other men from these streets died fighting for IS in either Syria or Iraq.
El-Sheikh and Coty had already had their British citizenship removed by the Home Secretary. Now a trial, possibly in the United States, seems the most likely outcome. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, West London.
Well, with IS on the run in Syria, how useful is the capture of these two British jihadis, and what information could they provide? Here's our Middle East correspondent, Quentin Somerville.
They called it home, and Raqqa was their capital, but their pit is now a ruin. It's not known yet how long Alexander Coty and El-Shafi el-Sheikh stayed here, but Kurdish and Arab fighters fought in these streets for months, and more than 650 died, freeing the city from the so-called Islamic State. The corpses of foreign fighters littered the alleyways, but even then we knew that plenty had escaped. In a ceasefire deal, hundreds of IS fighters were allowed to leave the city. Across Syria, IS members began to flee through Kurdish regime and rebel lines. The two British men, part of an IS cell from West London, were picked up by Kurdish forces trying to flee to Turkey. The two are a significant prize. They may be able to answer questions about what happened here. This is Dabiq, where Mohammed Emwazi, Jihadi John, murdered aid worker Peter Abdulrahman Kassig. The same cell killed Britain's Alan Henning and David Haynes. Their bodies have never been recovered. The West London cell was seen as the worst of the worst, IS superstars who had an air of invulnerability, but no more. Now all are dead or in captivity. They may also have information on the missing British journalist John Cantley. Kidnapped by IS, he's fronted some of their propaganda videos. This was his last appearance from Mosul, before it too was taken from IS group. And do they know the whereabouts of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the IS leader? Despite repeated claims that he is dead, he was last heard from in September last year. The captured men have served one significant purpose, though. A new front has opened in Syria. Turkey is attacking Kurdish forces. It calls them terrorists. But the coalition sees the Kurds as vital and effective allies against IS, and it wants the world to know those allies have just captured two of the Caliphate's most wanted. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Beirut.
Two of the biggest US companies developing self-drive cars, Uber and Waymo, have settled a court case. Uber agreed to surrender equity worth more than $200 million to Waymo, which accused it of stealing trade secrets. Our North America technology reporter, Dave Lee, has the details.
This case captivated Silicon Valley, mostly because of this man.
Good morning, Travis.
Uber's former chief executive, Travis Kalanick, is considered by many to be the very embodiment of Silicon Valley's bro culture, overconfidence and aggressive ambition. In court this week, he was accused of orchestrating a grand plan to steal self-driving technology from Google and then put it into Uber's own cars. Mr. Kalanick believes the tech is vital if Uber is to survive. Jurors heard how Mr. Kalanick had meetings with a then Google employee, Anthony Levandowski, one of the world's leading experts in it. It was alleged that Mr. Levandowski stole more than 14,000 confidential documents and then left Google to set up his own company. Then he sold it to Uber. In a remarkable moment during the trial, the jury was shown this scene from the 1989 film Wall Street. The prosecution said Mr. Kalanick acted like a real-life Gordon Gekko.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right.
But convincing jurors that Travis Kalanick is something of a slippery operator wasn't going to be enough to win the case. What the prosecution had to demonstrate was that Uber was using the stolen technology, and that was proving much more difficult.
And so the risk for Google would have been that they were a bully and that they went after a competitor in order to suppress competition rather than to vindicate their legitimate intellectual property rights. Conversely, the risk for Uber would have, by continuing, would have been, well, what if we lose the whole thing?
And so this settlement is perhaps a good result for both sides. As part of the deal, Uber agreed to give up 0.34% of its company, worth around $245 million. In a statement, Mr. Kalanick insisted no trade secrets were ever used, and said had the trial played out, Uber would have won. We won't get the chance to find out if he's right. Dave Lee, BBC News, San Francisco.
Let's take a look at some of the stories making the news. The British government says it is reviewing its work with the charity Oxfam following reports that Oxfam staff regularly use prostitutes in Haiti in the aftermath of the 2010 earthquake. The Department for International Development said that Oxfam had serious questions to answer about how it dealt with the abuse of vulnerable people. Oxfam has denied a cover-up. Thousands of Venezuelans have rushed to the border crossings with Colombia after President Juan Manuel Santos announced a tightening of Colombian controls. More than 30,000 Venezuelans enter Colombia daily to look for temporary work or to buy essential goods. Researchers at Edinburgh University have grown human eggs in the laboratory for the first time. They say the breakthrough is an opportunity to explore how human eggs develop, much of which remains a mystery to science. The hope is these findings could lead to new ways of preserving women's fertility. An asteroid up to 40 meters wide, which was only discovered 5 days ago, has skimmed past Earth at a distance of 64,000 kilometers. Now, this is less than a fifth of the distance between Earth and the Moon. While the pass is relatively close in astronomical terms, it's nowhere near enough to be a threat. Now, the British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has arrived in Bangladesh to investigate the plight of the Rohingya Muslim refugees from Myanmar. After a meeting with the Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Mr. Johnson said he'd discussed all issues of cooperation to try to help the Rohingyas. He also said he would raise the plight of the refugees with Aung San Suu Kyi on a visit to Myanmar after he's visited a refugee camp on the Bangladesh-Burma border near Cox's Bazar, as well as northern Rakhine.
What we all want to see is a safe, dignified and secure returns for the people, for the Rohingya, back to their place of origin. And talking to His Excellency and to the Prime Minister just now, I was really struck by how Bangladesh and the United Kingdom really share a common analysis of what needs to be done. But I think where you're obviously right is we need to make those points together to the government in Naypyidaw.
Stay with us on BBC News. Still to come, the EU's chief negotiator warns the UK will get no transition period without agreement on key issues up front. This is BBC News. The latest headlines. President Trump has blocked the release of a classified memo that rebutted claims there was anti-Trump bias in the FBI's Russia investigation. Egypt's army has begun a major operation against terrorist organizations in several parts of the country. The government said a military campaign involving defense forces and the police is being carried out in the Sinai Peninsula, the Nile Delta and the Western Deserts. Security forces have for years battled an Islamic State insurgency in North Sinai, which has killed hundreds of soldiers, police and civilians. Our Egypt correspondent Sally Nabil sent this report.
The Egyptian army has decided to strike harder than ever against Islamist militants in Sinai. The army has released footage of a full-scale offensive targeting insurgent groups operating in the turbulent peninsula for more than 5 years.
قامت عناصر من قواتنا الجوية باستهداف بعض البؤر والأوقار.
Egyptian air forces have targeted terrorist hideouts and their arms depots in northern central Sinai. The naval forces have been beefing up their security measures to cut terrorist supply lines.
The scope of the military operation is perhaps unprecedented. While it focuses on northern Sinai, a closed military zone with sparse civilian population and no media access, it is also intended to cover other parts in the Pop Delta and the western desert bordering the chaotic Libya. People in northern Sinai have told us highways in and out of the area have been closed, as well as petrol stations. Schools will be shut down too until further notice. The offensive takes place after gunmen killed more than 300 worshippers at a mosque in northern Sinai last November. Since then, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi gave his armed forces a 3-month period to wipe out the deeply rooted insurgency in the area. A deadline seen by many as unrealistic has been set for late February.
You can't have a precise time frame when you are battling terrorists. The operation has started, but it's the developments on the ground that will decide when it is going to end. I don't think the troops will go back to their barracks before they complete their mission and destroy the militants' capabilities.
Sinai has witnessed similar military operations before, even if not. Many wonder if this one will succeed in what the past ones failed to achieve. Sally Nabil, BBC News, Cairo.
The European Union's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, has warned that a transition period for the UK after it leaves the bloc is not guaranteed unless what he calls substantial disagreements can be overcome. John Pina reports.
Brexit's coming and time's running short, just 13 months before Britain's officially out of the European Union. And today the EU had a sharp warning: sort out key sticks or there'll be no deal and no transition. Britain's Brexit secretary met the EU's chief negotiator in Downing Street on Monday. Friendly enough, but there's just weeks to thrash out the shape of a Brexit transition.
Oh, here we go.
Today in Brussels, with a big EU summit coming next month, Michel Barnier had a blunt message, in terms easy to understand.
If these disagreements persist, the transition is not a given.
So much to sort out, and talks are getting prickly on the rights of migrants who arrive after Brexit Day. Will Brussels block trade if Britain breaks EU rules? The Brexit secretary called that idea plain discourteous. Oh no, it isn't, said Monsieur Barnier.
Négociation, on ne trouvera dans notre attitude.
My attitude hasn't been in the least discourteous or vindictive, he said. We never wish to punish the UK. It's foreign to my state of mind. And how to leave the EU without bringing back a hard north-south Irish border. No one wants that, but
it is important to tell the truth. A UK decision to leave the single market and to leave the customs union would make border checks unavoidable.
It's not just a political problem at this shoe shop in Newry, Northern Ireland. These shoes are meant for walking on both sides of the border. Customs and tariffs could mean a business like this running into trouble.
What we need is easy access from the factory to our shop floor. And if there is a hard border, then there will be hold-ups all the way along that we cannot predict.
The government wants to keep allies on side. Brexiteers who say stand up to Brussels, and unionists who say Britain and Northern Ireland must leave the customs union as one.
The bottom line is this, that Northern Ireland will leave the European Union with the rest of the United Kingdom. We would not countenance a situation where there would either be political, constitutional barriers within the United Kingdom, and economic barriers within the United Kingdom internal market would be catastrophic for Northern Ireland.
We are not prepared to accept that we become rule takers from the EU when we have no say over it. That would be the worst of all worlds. Yes, business wants certainty. Yes, business wants to know they have time to get ready for things like customs changes. That's what the implementation period is about. But it's not about having the EU try and dictate to us in a way that would be unacceptable both to us and, strangely, to businesses as well.
Tonight, the Brexit Secretary is saying he's surprised Michel Barnier isn't clear Britain just wants to go on trading as now during a transition. The government is hoping for compromise in negotiations, whatever anyone says now. But if there's no transition deal next month, ministers will have to prepare Britain and British business for the real possibility of a cliff-edge Brexit. Every month, every week, every day a new problem. If there's a transition deal, then comes deciding ambitions for Brexit, which split MPs and ministers. The next date with potential crisis always closer and closer. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
It attracts 1.5 million tourists every year and is arguably the world's biggest street party. Rio de Janeiro's annual carnival has officially started, but it's feared that funding cuts could take the shine of Brazil's famous festival. The mayor says the cuts are because of a financial crisis, but critics say the evangelical mayor disapproves of the raucous annual festival, which is rooted in Catholic culture. Sarah Corker reports.
Rio Carnival means costumes, music and moves. Thousands of people poured into the city's famous Samba drone to see the colourful processions and dancers. Earlier, the first of many street parties got underway. Carnival is happiness, pure love, this man said. And continuing with tradition, the 5-day festival officially started when the mayor handed over the keys of the city to the fictional King of Misrule. But the city's evangelical mayor has been accused of acting on his conservative views by cutting funding for this year's carnival. And as the brass band struck up an anthem, he had to defend himself.
It isn't true what people say that the mayor has any prejudice against Carnival. I'm not prejudiced. I admire, respect, applaud and have made every effort so that Carnival continues with much success.
Funding for Rio's top Samba schools has been halved. Cuts, the mayor said, are because of Rio's financial crisis. His critics, though, say he just doesn't like the festival, despite the fact it attracts more than 1 million visitors. And as Brazil emerges from its worst ever recession, many here are just happy to have something to smile about. Sarah Corker, BBC News.
Now to South Korea, where Pyeongchang is hosting the Winter Olympic Games. Canada dominates the early stages of the curling. After 4 sessions of the round-robin mixed doubles, it leads on points, but only just. Canada, Norway, Olympic athletes from Russia and Switzerland have all played 4 games, winning 3 and losing 1. Russian athletes Yevgenia Tarasova and Vladimir Morozov topped the board after the first event of the team figure skating. The European champions, who are real-life partners, produced an ambitious program to claim 10 points ahead of Canada and Germany. Shoma Uno of Japan is out in front in the men's singles. Last year's world silver medalist impressed with a series of clean moves and spectacular jumps. Meanwhile, France's Perrine Lafont leads the first round qualification of the women's moguls freestyle skiing. An impressive run at the Phoenix Snowpark pushed her ahead of Canadian Andy Node and Morgan Schild of the United States. And if you want to find out more on any of the stories we're covering, just head to our website. You'll find all the latest news, reaction, analysis, along with updated live pages and reports from our correspondents across the globe. That's bbc.com/news, or you can just download the BBC News app. Now, a reminder of our top story. President Trump has blocked the release of a classified memo that rebutted claims that there was anti-Trump bias in the FBI. The White House said the memo, written by a Democratic congressman, couldn't be released because it contained classified material. Efforts are now underway to redact the memo in order to get it published. US officials say they're considering what action to take after 2 British jihadis were captured in Syria. Alexander Koti and El Shafi El Sheikh were part of the team of 4 British IS members. Bye-bye.